Well, it's Memorial Day weekend. History? Well, America has history, a few hundred years. Unlike Rome, thousands of years. Unlike Egypt, tens of thousands of years. Well, with us today is Peter Aigner, and he is the director of the Gotham Center for New York City History. Does that mean you know where all the bodies are from the 16th century on?
I know where a bunch of them are, yeah.
Well, tell us about what you do, and give us some interesting. It's Memorial Day weekend. Give us some interesting stories about things that will, make people scratch their heads.
Well, speaking of Memorial Day and bodies, one thing I'll say at the outset. So I run the only academic center devoted to New York City history. New York, because of its scale, its population, has probably contributed more people to more of America's wars than any other city by a long shot. The main reason we should be thinking about New York City this Memorial Day is that we are just a few weeks out from the anniversary of the nation's founding, really, 1776. For a long time, still today, we think of Boston, we think of Philadelphia. We don't think of New York when we think of the Revolution. And that is 100% wrong. New York is the city at the center of that story. And in speaking of bodies, the vast majority of people who fought and died for this country's creation are buried here in New York City. Those are the victims of the American Revolution who died as POWs under the Brits at 2.5 times the number of the battlefield dead.
Now, I remember when I never knew growing up that Federal Hall existed. I never knew it was the first capital of the United States of America. And about 10, 15 years ago, we had some kind of event, and Newt Gingrich came, the former speaker, and we had a wonderful event recognizing that Federal Hall was the first capital of the United States of America, and I made everybody get up and sing God Bless America.
As you should. I mean, it's wild just how utterly ignorant, the whole country, but especially New Yorkers are about this history. We are always focused on tomorrow here in the city, which means that we forget just how much of the country's history is right here in the five boroughs. I joke that it's the only place where you could imagine a building as beautiful and expensive as the old Penn Station could be torn down. Federal Hall, what's there now, it's not the original iteration, but that was the Capitol building, the first Capitol building. It's where Washington sworn in as the first president when New York is the first capital for 5 years. All the debate about the Constitution, that all happens here. All those famous founding fathers that you were taught about, they all walk these streets.
Wow. You go to Europe, you go to Rome, and you go to London, and you go to Paris, and people there have histories for thousands of years, and it's strange, that here in New York or here in the United States, it's only a couple hundred years old. Now, give us a couple of examples of things when you learned about them that you said, "Wow, I didn't know that."
Well, I mean, the war literally begins and ends in New York, right? So the biggest invasion, the biggest battle of the war, and the formal, the first major battle of the war is here in New York in the summer of '76. The British sent 32,000 soldiers on 421 vessels into the harbor at a time when the population of New York proper, which is basically just everything below City Hall Park, is 25,000, right? The famous quote from the period is, "It looked like all of London was afloat." That remains the biggest battle of the war, and it almost ended several times, just weeks after the Declaration of Independence right here in New York City. I don't think people know that. I think people also don't know, for example, that the first bloodshed in the American Revolution happens here in New York City. It's a thing called the Battle of Golden Hill. Everybody knows about the Boston Massacre. The Boston Massacre happens weeks later. It's a protest that's held in solidarity with this, the first exchange of weapons between British soldiers and American colonials. It's a miracle that no one died, and mostly, I think, because no one died, it didn't get into the history books. But, we should remember that history. There's no plaque there either. It's literally an alleyway today used for garbage.
And I remember, I'm going to tell you, when I went to PS 192 on 137th Street, opposite City College and Lewiston Stadium, I remember a lot of things and they taught me. They taught me about New York history, and I never knew that Henry Hudson went up the Hudson River. I mean, it wasn't called the Hudson River at that time, in the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria. And it was, and later on in life, when a friend of mine loaned me his speedboat and I went up the Hudson, I was thinking about that Henry Hudson, 400, well, he did it in, oh my God, in 1608. I'm not sure if I'm right, but that's 400 years, 400 years before that, and 400 years in the overall history of the world is not a lot.
It's not a lot, but for the British, the loss of the American colonies, which were by far their biggest part of their empire, it wasn't such a big deal. But for the British, they go on to create they already were the biggest empire at that time, but it's their quote first global empire. But by a century later, they've got control of 55 countries, and that's just kind of their formal territorial control.
They what was the reputation the British had? They ruled the 7 seas.
Exactly.
And now I understand from President Trump that was on a couple of weeks ago, and he said that the British had 50 ships, and now they're down to 17.
Yeah.
They only have what is it? One aircraft carrier?
Well, I mean, World War I and World War II just knocked them out, right? And the rise of the United States, as well as other powers like the Japanese and the Germans, just diminished that diminished the scope and might of the British Empire.
Yep. Well, Peter, thank you so much, Peter. Let me say your name right, Peter Aigner.
Peter Aigner,
director of the Gotham Center for New York City History. Let's do it again real soon. Maybe we'll do it on 4th of July.
Let's do it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.